At some point in your career, somebody put your name on a project as a sponsor. Maybe they told you what that meant, but they probably didn't. Project management gets a lot of attention, of course. There's certifications, methodologies, and I fully understand that. I myself hold my PMP designation. Entire careers are built around it. But there's another role. There's a role within projects that doesn't get as much attention as, say, the project manager role does, and that is around sponsorship. The project sponsor is a really important role that doesn't really get enough attention. There's no formal training. We don't have much guidance out there in terms of what good looks like. And yet, this role has more influence on project success than almost anything else. That role of project sponsorship is often handed to operational leaders. Most people who hold that title have never been taught about how to do that role right. Today, we're giving you 3 things great project sponsors do. Whether you're sponsoring something right now or you're ready to take on a project, this episode will change how you show up for your team. Hi, I'm Sarah, fractional COO and operational turnaround partner for SMB. I help businesses struggling with complexity and challenges within their operational core of their business. I work with founders to install scalable, repeatable processes and unlocking scale with the great teams and tools they already have.
And hi, I'm Penny. I'm also a fractional COO and a strategic operations consultant, helping product and consumer brands install, upgrade, and run scalable operations and operational systems that reflect the founder's unique vision and ambition. And as Sarah said, the project sponsor often holds the key to a project's success or failure, and there's little to no formal training on how to play that role for your project team. Today, we're going to change that. Let's get into it.
Let's go.
So, tip 1 that we have is define and protect the mission of this project. Great project sponsors are crystal clear with their team, with their project manager, on why that project exists and what success looks like. They protect that clarity throughout the entire project. And you know that it's something that can often get lost in the tornado of everyday work. And that reminder and really holding ground on what that mission is something that's going to keep that project grounded around that mission. The sponsor owns the why, not the how, and the distinction matters enormously.
You know, Penny, we hear the word project scope creep. That's like as a PM, and even our non-technical PM listeners, founders have probably heard scope creep, and we think about that in terms of the project manager, but this really is scope creep is something that project sponsor it's the thing they're most responsible for when it comes to being crystal clear and having that clarity you just talked about. Is who's the one on the team that's going to be the biggest protector of not having scope creep is definitely that sponsor.
That's true. When priorities shift, and sometimes they shift because they need to, and sometimes they shift accidentally. We've all been there on projects like that. The sponsor is the person who needs to decide whether the project mandate changes, gets paused, or whether the project needs to stay the course, and that project manager needs to get everybody back on board the original mission. And often the project sponsor is not present for those kinds of decisions, and we want to get them like, this is your job, is to make sure that this is the rallying cry for your project team, right?
Absolutely. You know, that leads really nicely into our next tip, which is really around know when to step in and when to step back. We recognize that as a project sponsor, we're not saying that it's those sponsors' job to be at every meeting. We understand that often project sponsors are high-level leaders and they have a certain role that they're fulfilling in the organization. You know, the idea everyone has a day job, but it's really around being present when it matters. The PM is, of course, going to manage the tasks and the timelines. They're going to be the ones who probably actually set up the meetings in our calendars. But they can't, PMs on their own aren't going to be able to be the ones to, they'll facilitate, but they aren't actually responsible for key decisions that come up in projects. And those will either be around that shift that you just talked about, Penny. Those shifts do come and they do often happen for really good business reasons. So project managers, however, can't approve budget changes, make strategic trade-offs, or resolve those inevitable conflicts that happen in between the functions.
Yeah,
And
it's so true.
exactly, that's where a really good sponsor has the responsibility of, having their finger on the pulse of the project and doing, having that right balance between letting the people do the work, but being there when they're needed.
Yeah, that's true. Get in front of the decision making cycle by staying plugged into what's going on from your project manager. Sitting in on project meetings because that's how you're getting plugged into information, that's not sponsorship. That's kind of micromanagement. That is the
Yes.
opposite of what you should be doing, because again, what they're doing in those project meetings is the how. You are in front of unlocking their ability to do the how and getting in front of those decisions like, have we crossed a threshold and where we thought we were budget wise, time wise, resource wise? Stay plugged into your project manager and be the kind of person that the project manager can bring things to and be responsive to those things. That is your job as a
Yeah.
project sponsor.
Yeah, exactly. And to put more framing around the kind of the execution of what that looks like, the other side of it is really about removing things that are blockers.
Mm,
That's another really key thing as a
excellent
project
one.
sponsor. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Is to, and blockers, they, as we know, come out of nowhere. They can also come out of really small things. I've seen over my entire career that it isn't big stuff that derails projects and makes them off track. It is always so often the little things that, regulatory or system constraints. We've, all had those ERP moments or whatever system your business is on. And it's usually those tiny little, we didn't realize details that throws people off. So
Yeah.
as a sponsor, it's really your job to remove that blocker.
Yeah, I'll give you a great example of that of when I was running a product team in cannabis where there are a lot of regulations, and the regulations are different from state to state, and we're trying to develop and launch new products in multiple states. So there are multiple different guidelines and we're delving into new waters, and these are waters where things are always shifting. So interpretations of rules are different, and the product team got stuck trying to wind their way through some regulations, and it was making the project take too long, and it was making the development of that product almost impossible. So we got budget for a regulatory consultant who unlocked that part of the project and allowed us to move forward, complete the development, and have a release candidate. And without that, we could have spun a lot of time, but as the project sponsor, I was able to quickly make the argument of time is money here. Here's how much it's going to cost us to get a consultant. Here's how much it's going to cost us to not release these products on schedule. Easy pitch, but it had to come from the sponsor. The project manager was doing their best to wind their way through it. I was really just paying attention to what are these big things that we need to put in place to make sure the building blocks for this project are in place.
That's amazing. And one thing I want to speak to before kind of tying in all of these points we talk about in this one is there's companies who enable what's called a PMO, a project management office. So definitely a function that's devoted to the project management. And I've often seen in business where people are like, do I need an office like that? Really struggling with execution. I would encourage anyone who's in that spot of, do we need to dial up our project management practices? You probably do, but I really encourage everyone to look at the sponsorship, like all the things we're talking about today, look there first to see if you have your sponsorships, or even if that's you're playing that role, that you really come at it the right way, because that is often the source. It's misdiagnosed in companies. Sometimes we think
Yeah.
it's the project management function. It's
Yeah.
really a sponsorship problem.
Yeah, that's true. And that's a perfect lead in to our third tip today, Sarah, which is stay connected without taking over. And this is a little bit of something that we've already talked about in the last 10 minutes here of staying at the right level, but you need to have your finger on the pulse of what's going on, but not be a micromanager, right? You're kind of walking the fence here, but you really need to be informed, especially about the big trends of what's going on your project. Great sponsors find that right rhythm of involvement present enough to be informed and remove blockers and get resources and approve changes or point the team back in the original direction, but letting the PM and the team really sit in the driver's seat of how this project is getting accomplished. So ask good questions, be there for support, and make it clear what kind of support you can add to your team. If somebody comes to you and says, we're arguing about how to put this entry in the database, I would ask a lot of questions about it, ask about how they resolve conflict in the team, and then send them back to get that work done in the right place, rather than being that micromanaging kind of sponsor where they have to run to you for every small decision about how that gets done, right?
That's absolutely I love the idea of balance. And I think that micromanagement piece is so easy of a trap to get into because you've just heard us talk about it today. Oh, I really need to get more involved. Okay, let's go. And we're encouraging that balance, that right speed of present and available and supportive, but also letting the work get done, having that trust in your team, in your functional teams, in your project management layer, if you have one. We really encourage you to, again, think about that balance when you think about the tips that we've shared, and just ensuring that when you provide that support as the sponsor, we also want to encourage you to, as the project goes on, really ensure that everybody's, as a sponsor, moving in the same direction.
Yeah, yeah. And if you're having trouble with that piece of it, Sarah, as a project sponsor, if you're having trouble understanding how to walk that line, three things that you can ask your project manager when you check in with them about the project. What is one thing that could derail this project right now?
Yes,
You're asking them, do
risks.
you have that on your radar? Are we managing risks? And are you aware of that as a project sponsor? So if it's something that is likely to happen, maybe it's something that you can resolve and take off their concern list. Number two, what do you need from me that you haven't asked for?
Mm,
Offer that up. Make sure that you are open to be able to help that project manager get that project across the finish line. And then last, I always love to ask, are we still solving the right problem? Are we still on mission for this project? And sometimes, especially if you haven't talked to that project manager in 6 weeks, and like, let's face it, things are busy. Executives as project sponsors, it's not the only thing on your radar. So you may be sitting down with this project manager very infrequently. The project manager may be embarrassed and say, I'm having an enormous problem with scope creep. Well, you're going to support that project manager in getting that project back on schedule.
exactly. So here's what we would love for you to walk away with today. To do a bit of a recap, define and protect the mission. Everyone needs to know what success looks like before we even start. So important to define, as I like to say, what does good look? You need to know when to step in and when to step back. Your team needs authority, but they don't need your full attendance, and they don't need you to creep over the side of being a micromanager. And then finally, know and ask the right questions. So being curious is one of the most powerful tools that a sponsor has in their toolkit. If today's conversation sparked something for you, reach out, find us on LinkedIn, or you can visit our website. This is what we do. And please subscribe to the podcast if you've not already. It truly helps us out and helps you make sure that you're not missing an episode.
That's right. Why? Because great businesses don't just happen, they operate on purpose.
On purpose.
Thanks,
Thanks, Penny.
Sarah. Thanks, everyone. See you next
Thank
time.
you.